Join Jason and Mike in true Marvelite style as they wax poetic like true believers.
Excelsior!
In the MarvelSphere.
Spidey sense tingling.
The MarvelSphere.
It's clobberin' time.
We're in the MarvelSphere. In the MarvelSphere.
Avengers assemble.
The MarvelSphere.
Hey, Bob.
It's time for MarvelSphere.
Hey y'all, welcome to the next episode of MarvelSphere here at NeverEndingRadicalDude.com. As always, I'm your host Mike McGee along with
Jason Furie.
And we'd like to take this opportunity to finally talk about what was one of the biggest summer blockbusters this year, X-Men Days of Future Past. And as you might have known from previous episodes, Jason here happens to be quite the X fan.
This is true. Obsessed with all things X-Men, especially my man, Cyclops.
My prior exposure to the X universe came primarily through the cartoon, and then I got into the comics more and more. And I never really had a favorite X-Men, but like as you said, Jason, Cyclops is your number one dude, and things have been pretty interesting for him so far in the comic world.
Yeah, it's a good time to be a Cyclops fan. He's pretty much everywhere. He's in, mainly you'll see him in Uncanny X-Men and the standalone Cyclops ongoing, which is kind of a dream come true. Anyone that knows about that comic it's not the Cyclops we all know and love. It's the time displaced young Cyclops from the original X-Men, just a few weeks after he became an X-Man, but he's in the future, present. I don't know. It's a mess, but it's fun reading. I mean, if you're a fan of sci-fi and superheroes, it's a great mix of the two, because to me, it really, I don't know. It's more of a sci-fi fan in me than X-Men fan, because it's just so far out. It's just kind of like a road trip in space with your dad. Cool.
So what was your first exposure to the X-Men? Was it through comics, cartoon, video games?
It was definitely through comic books, especially in the early 90s. I was a big fan of the comic books and the TV show on Fox, like you mentioned. And that's really how I got into the world and the toys. Of course, I was huge onto the X-Men and Marvel toys, and Cyclops was always my first pick as a kid. And, you got to call dibs on him. And everybody seems to gravitate towards a mutant in the X-Men franchise, and that just happened to be mine, and I've been getting crap for it ever since.
Yeah, especially when everyone's so Wolverine crazy these days, which, I mean, I'm okay with the character. I just never really thought of him as my favorite. I always liked Nightcrawler out of everyone. He's not my absolute favorite character ever in comics, but I always liked his sensibilities, his easygoing approach to the team, to life, kind of very jovial. So
it's true. It's kind of like a test. You can always tell like how big of an X-Men fan somebody is by just kind of casually asking them, like, what's your favorite? I'm not saying it can't be Wolverine, but chances are if it is, you don't know shit.
Good grief! It's the negative zone.
I'm looking for that guy that's like long shot. I'm like, oh man, you read comic books. That's cool. But Wolverine, boring. Even Nightcrawler, that fine. Colossus, Nightcrawler, go for it. But if it's just like Wolverine, it's just so cool. And they're like, Cyclops is such a dick. I was like, you've just watched the movies, haven't you? You're like 14. I'm like, okay.
Okay, so out of all of the stories you've read, out of all of these different kind of arcs that the characters have gone through, what is one of your favorite like X-Men stories or X-Men story arcs?
I mean, I'm supposed to say Dark Phoenix Saga or something like that, but I gotta say it's Joss Whedon's astonishing X-Men run. It was just amazing. It did everything I wanted an X-Men story to do. It hit the sweet spot. Everybody got their fair shake. They all had enough screen time or page time. And it was just so well-rounded, good story, sci-fi, fun, cool characters. And, Wolverine was wonderful in that because he was part of the team. He wasn't front and center.
On that, we both agree is like Astonishing X-Men. That first arc set up by Joss Whedon was perfect, like team banter interaction type of storyline, and so many twists too, like things I didn't even expect to show up, like the Danger Room becoming sentient, becoming like an enemy.
Yeah, and not to mention the long-awaited return of
spoiler sense tingling.
Colossus. That was kind of how he came back into the scene.
There was a lot of cool twists I really liked. I like how they kind of incorporated the larger Marvel universe into their story towards the end, with all the heroes kind of coming together and being helpless in the hands of a gigantic bullet.
Nice.
That was
took
really cool.
Kitty Pryde out.
Yeah, it gave Kitty Pryde like a lot of muscle in that arc. Like, she became really like no holds barred, one of my favorites from that point on.
And I can see the writing room. It's like, we're going to bring Colossus back, and then we're going to get rid of Kitty Pryde. Like, wait, no, that's what everybody wants to see.
Well, that's the Whedon effect right there. He'll break your heart right after it looks like things are promising.
He did.
But whatever, they're all back now, so.
Yeah, besides that, I gotta tip my hat to the first few arcs of Ultimate X-Men. I know people frown upon reimaginings, but I gotta say that Ultimate Universe for a while there, early 2000s or whatever that was a blast. And they really nailed X-Men for quite a while. I'd say the first 20 or so issues were just X-Men glee. I loved it.
So it seems when it comes to the comics, we find a lot of common ground. How about with their interpretation outside the comics, primarily like in the film universe from 20th Century Fox?
That's a fickle bitch. It's tough. Very cool parts of the movie franchise and very disappointing parts of the franchise. I think if what was it, 1999, 2000 is when the first X-Men came out. I gotta say, the pictures and the press stuff for that movie looked horrible when they're in their like Matrix-inspired outfits, and it was just all leather, and it just didn't look good. But once I went in the theater and saw that movie, I was like, oh my God, this can happen. We can do superhero movies and do them right, whether they look like the comics or not. This was an X-Men movie. It was great. I loved it.
Again, I know you're a Cyclops guy. I'm not sure. What were your thoughts on his visual representation in the movie?
Well, I think James Marsden, who plays him, is perfect. I don't think he had a lot to go on.
Right.
And my biggest complaint with the movie franchise is they are all framed around Wolverine because they know what people like, and it's Wolverine. So I do feel like Wolverine stole a lot of thunder from a lot of different storylines that should have featured Cyclops. Obviously, X3 and X2, he's barely in it because Wolverine kind of takes charge. So X-Men 1, he was great, and he had his role, and he did a lot of great stuff. X2, he just kind of sat back seat, but I was okay with it because, you got to share the love. It's X-Men. There's so many characters. So I was like, okay, that's cool. And then once X3 hit, I was weeping blood.
Oh, poor Jason and the Ratner wrath.
The Ratner effect happened, and I got destroyed, but I don't know. I don't even know who to blame. It was just a mess. X3 is very hard to watch for, I would imagine just, I can't even imagine like Gambit fans. I think that was maybe almost worse. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, because he was promised, I think, originally in that movie. Yeah, I mean, Ratner didn't do a great job with that film at all, but I feel like he was past like the very short end of the stick because for a long time, Singer was on board with a third movie. Then he decided to go off and do his little Superman film, and then they passed the reins over to Matthew Vaughn, who stuck with it for a while, but then he moved on. And then he eventually came back to do the great First Class. But yeah, then they're kind of like, hey, Ratner, you're a guy who's known for kind of just filling in the gaps on movies. Why don't you fill in the gaps on this movie? And he's like,
rent-a-director going on.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, I don't know how much of the fault was with him as a director, how much of the fault was with what was established before, what was expected from the studios and from the writers and so forth. Like, it just seemed like a mess all around from everybody.
Yeah, I'll agree. It's not solely Ratner's fault. He didn't help because of just his track record as that kind of director.
Right.
But I do remember vividly watching people leave. Obviously, Superman Returns was big. Bryan Singer wanted to do that. He brought James Marsden with him as a character, which pretty much screwed Cyclops' chance for being an X3. Right. I don't know if you remember, Halle Berry was bitching on set a lot about wanting more screen time, which is understandable, but I think her being involved in the movie meant that someone had to step aside and she had to take up kind of the mantle that Cyclops did. Right. So I think someone just thought, well, he's going to leave anyway, so screw him. Let's just put her up where she wants, and let's rent this director and say goodbye to that director, and it was just a shitstorm.
Good grief! It's the negative zone.
I think you actually touched upon something very interesting early on, where it's that there were a lot of characters to develop, but they seemed almost initially scared of developing any other characters outside of Wolverine. A lot of the narrative revolves around Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, and don't get me wrong, initially I didn't think he was the perfect casting choice, but he eventually won me over with his portrayal. Like, I like my Wolverine kind of
short,
more
dirty, rough around the edges.
Yeah, a little bit grislier. And Jackman was at first, when I first saw him in X-Men, it seemed a little bit too ruggedly handsome, standing up straight, you know, kind of towering over everyone else. But he eventually won me over with his attitude.
Yeah, it's a great character. I can't complain. It's fun. And whenever I think about the movies, we've had so many X-Men movies at this point. I'm not selfish. I just want every mutant that they're going to involve in this franchise to have at least one good moment in any of the films.
Yeah.
You know, I don't expect Cyclops to be the star of everything. And he had his moments, I think, in the first X-Men movie, which is why I could forgive other ones a little bit.
Honestly, I think, those first two movies were the perfect balance, near perfect balance, because characters like Nightcrawler, for example, he got a good arc in the second movie. Like you said, Cyclops got quite a bit to do in the first movie.
Yep.
And Jean Grey in those first two movies actually had some kind of development going on. And in the third movie, she just became Psycho.
Yeah. But, you know, I can at least handpick a moment from each character where, like, wow, that was cool. That was what I want to see on screen.
But for a while there, it just felt like, okay, let's make all these Wolverine-centric. Let's have a bunch of mutant characters in there, but let's not develop them that much. And that's where stuff like, I guess, X-Men Origins and...
Yeah, which Cyclops showed up in. It was weird.
That's where
they got his powers wrong. They didn't even do it right. He was, like, burning the school when he shot it. Yeah. Anybody that reads any X-Men comic knows it's a concussive force. It's not fire. Small details like that are just super lazy.
And what they did to Deadpool, it's like...
Ugh. I can't. No, I don't even know.
So we got kind of that was kind of the low point, I want to say, in the franchise, was when they were trying to just cram as much in as they could without actually developing it properly. But then Vaughn came back and gave us First Class. What did you think of the quote-unquote reboot?
I was very skeptical for that movie. I wanted new life to be put into the X-Men franchise, and I thought he was a good guy to do it. I was down with it. Definitely no Cyclops, no Wolverine, none of the characters besides Professor X and Magneto, really, that you come to know and love. So it was a gamble, but I think it worked. I really loved that movie. I thought it was solid. It was just great storytelling, great balance of characters, visually very awesome, and I think a really good start for a new direction.
Getting back to what you're saying about Professor X and Magneto being kind of the focal point, it's like it actually gave a much needed flesh and blood history to them that was only hinted at in the first couple movies. Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen had great chemistry together, you know, kind of working off each other. Oh, here's my point. Oh, here's my counterpoint to that, you know, their whole endless debate about mutant rights. But that movie actually made it like a legitimate relationship in many ways.
Yeah. So much so that they canceled the planned Magneto movie or any other spinoff like that. They're just like, you know what? I think we can cover it and still call it an X-Men movie. Which
eventually brought director Bryan Singer back for this past May's X-Men Days of Future Past.
He's back.
I mean, they obviously took liberties with the original storyline from the comics and what have you, but what were your thoughts upon hearing about this idea of time travel and having the two different X teams have a crossover, essentially?
It's very X-Men of them. You know, anyone that reads the comics knows it's just batshit crazy in the comics, and there's all kinds of time displacement and parallel universes, and this person died then came back and this and that. So it's pretty nuts. So for them to introduce that element, I think really let the writers relax a bit and say, you know what, we can do whatever we want. We can redo this and redo that however we want. Adding a simple element like time travel, you can just reset everything. So I thought it was pretty smart.
Yeah, it was kind of a clever way to be like, oh, X-Men Origins Wolverine and X3, we can kind of sweep those under the rug a little.
Yeah.
But it's part of the story still, kind of, for those of you that like it.
Wolverine will freak out when he sees things that remind him of those movies. And that's pretty much what happens. And anyone that says he freaked out a little too much obviously didn't see those movies.
obviously.
So, I don't know. It's just kind of a funny way of doing it. Now, don't get me wrong. If it were up to me, after X-Men 3, they would have just laid it to rest and then rebooted it maybe 5 years later in a more classic comic book kind of sense. That's what I would have preferred. Like, just get the original X-Men going, you know, get like Angel, Jean Grey, Beast, Iceman, Cyclops, and give them the costumes and just go all out. But they were really into tying it into that old universe. So,
well, I think part of it is that, you know, 20th Century Fox has like got the death hold on the X-Men franchise, for film distribution at least, and it's just like, well, why not just keep the franchise going, you know, in universe essentially, instead of having to reboot, unlike what they do with like Spider-Man and stuff like that over at Sony. That you bring up a good point. It's like, if they just ended at X3 and Fox felt the need to be like, Marvel, you can have those rights back, we could have had first class X-Men being raised in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
That would have been amazing.
That would have been really cool. But
yeah, that would have been great. But, you know, you can't get everything.
Yeah.
So. I do like it. I mean, whatever. It's cool.
What really worked for you in this latest movie installment?
Well, it's a lot like First Class. I think it's just such solid storytelling. You really connect with the characters. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what heroes or villains are involved, because it's a good story with interesting characters. And I think that's exactly what Days of Future Past was. I didn't really have Cyclops in that movie, and we didn't have, you know, Jean Grey front and center, and it was still extremely fun. And, you know, Wolverine was in it a lot, but it's that dynamic, like you mentioned, between Professor X and Magneto that really sells that movie.
Harkening back to Singer's original X films, where there's a lot of characters. You have characters battling in the future, you have characters in the past changing the course of events. And it's just, but they're all given their equal opportunity to like demonstrate what they're made of. Like you have characters from the original movies like Colossus and Kitty Pryde and Iceman and things like that. And sure, they're kind of glanced over here and there in the other movies, and they're not really given they're not given the main plot of the story, but they're given their moments to show what they're all about. Like, you get the essence of those characters in this movie. I also enjoy, like, again, going back to Xavier and Magneto, like McAvoy and Fassbender are perfect, like, inheritors for those roles. Like, you can. And
who thought they'd be replaced?
Yeah, exactly. Like, you could believe that someone like Michael Fassbender's Magneto would turn into Ian McKellen's Magneto.
Yeah, I didn't think they could pull that off. I was like, that's just not going to work. How do you do what Ian McKellen just did with that character? But he nailed it. I'm not saying it was better, but it was at least equal. Days of Future Past is totally a Professor X movie. Any way you cut it, that's his story. It was awesome. Was there anything in the film that you didn't particularly care for? Considering, you know, I've already expressed what I would rather have them done with the franchise, with a clean reboot. But, you know, for where we are with the franchise, I thought it was near flawless. You can check out my full review on the website to see my in-depth opinion, but I couldn't complain after that. The only reason it wouldn't get a perfect 10 is just because there's just so much baggage being an X-Men movie that I just don't know what would please. I want to say the one thing that kind of bugged me about the film, aside from the fact, you know, even though this film is attempting to clean up a lot of continuity within the franchise as of right now, there still is quite a few hiccups that haven't been fully addressed. Yeah. Unless you were like a diehard X-Men film fan or whatever. Like Professor X's resurrection, you wouldn't have known about that unless you'd stuck around to the very, very, very end of X3. Yeah, and even in interviews, they're just like, whatever, we wanted to bring him back, so he's back. So he's back, yeah. And kind of like, well, coming back from the dead is kind of a big feat there. I'll tell you one thing that pisses me off. When people talk about this movie, they start complaining about the time travel aspects of it and how it could never work that way, or it shouldn't work this way or that way. They do it with the comics too. But who the hell is an authority on time travel? How do you know how it works? Exactly. No, but you can't argue that. You're like, oh, they just pop back in, or oh, you can't just have these characters come back at the end of the movie because of time. Like, how the hell do you know? Are you an expert on time travel? Yeah, that makes no sense. Escapist fantasy. Just enjoy it for what it is. It's like, yeah. So if there's someone approaching me saying like, well, they can't just do that, they can't just fix, but I'm just like, all right, next. That's just not interesting to me. You don't know what you're talking about. You have no creativity if you can't just let it go. I guarantee those same people are going to be arguing about the fact that a talking raccoon wouldn't
work in the real life.
Probably, yeah. He couldn't find the trigger. It's just, he'd be in the garbage can, shitting on himself.
I want to say like another kind of I don't know if it's a nitpick or not. It actually is kind of I feel, important part of the movie is that, again, they do have a lot of time to kind of showcase a lot of cool characters and what they're all about. But at the same time, they still do have a bunch of characters in there that really don't have to be there. Like Havoc from First Class. It's cool they got him back and stuff, but he and Toad and I forget who else was even in that scene, but they're in the Vietnam camp.
Like Spike, Toad.
And then you never see them again outside of like for 5 seconds when they're watching Magneto on TV.
Yeah, I think it was a big mistake throwing Havoc into that universe. I think when they were making First Class, they were just trying to get similar powered characters like Azazel and Havoc. And like, well, we need someone to shoot blasts and we need someone to teleport. And they're just like, you don't have to do that. If you don't have a good story for them, just don't do it.
Knowing enough is enough.
Yeah, it didn't have to be Havoc just to confuse everybody that reads the comic books.
Warts and all, I mean, it was a fun movie, though. It was very engaging. It did, honestly, even though I enjoyed First Class a lot, part of me still couldn't muster up enough to care about the franchise so much anymore.
Yeah.
And then between this movie and the Wolverine, like, I've definitely been reinvigorated in my X-fanaticism. I can't wait for
Spoiler sense tingling.
Apocalypse now.
Right. Anyone that finished Days of Future Past knows that they did correct a lot, and there is that one perfect scene, in my opinion, in the X Mansion at the end of that movie where they do fix everything because of the time travel aspect. Everybody's in their rightful place. You got Colossus and Kitty Pryde teaching together. You got
Kelsey
Beast
Grammer.
saying what's up. You got Cyclops and Jean Grey together with Professor X being the big principal boss, and it was just about 2 or 3 minutes of X-Men bliss. That's all I've ever wanted to see for the past 5 or 6 years.
And hopefully we'll see a little bit more because, like I said, we got X-Men Apocalypse coming our way in a couple of years here.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be allegedly taking place during the 80s with the founding of the core X-Men.
So, recasting and getting those characters back at it, could be what fans want. Seeing young Storm and Cyclops and Jean Grey could be awesome.
I think we might be getting another Wolverine movie with Jackman before he possibly finally retires from the role.
Yeah, who knows? He's sticking with it, I'll tell you that much, through thick and thin.
And for those of you who probably went to Comic-Con and saw it, we had some pretty cool Deadpool test footage that hopefully someone does something with that.
Make it a movie, please.
Yes, for those who look for it, it's leaked online, but so far I don't think anyone's taken it down, but it's mainly, was it CG animatics or
it's like it's all pretty much CG animatic type stuff. It definitely doesn't look like real, but it's great test footage to say, hey, if we had money we can make this look a lot better. But it's more for the pacing and style and tone, and it nailed it.
Yeah, and it's got Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool in it, in the original costume, doing Deadpool things, and
it's wonderful.
That's what hopefully,
so good.
It's hopefully what we'll get eventually, but yeah.
Well, the lesson the Avengers taught us is just do the costumes. You can modernize them a little bit, but just make them colorful, make them wild, make them weird. Just do it. That's what people want. It doesn't all have to be black spandex and leather.
So once again, you've been listening to MarvelSphere here on NeverEndingRadicalDude.com. Please keep checking in for the latest in nerd news and updates. And as always, face front, true believers.
Check out those reviews on our website.
Yeah, bub.
Bub.
I was trying to think of something besides bub to end on. I was like, what else? What other famous X-Men character is there?
Colossus.
That has a famous, saying.
Excelsior.
I am Magneto, master of magnets.
I am Pyro. Let me bake that for you.